the Ontario government's sick leave proposal. It's offering to double the federal sickness benefit for Ontarians from $500 a week to $1,000. But the feds say it's up to the province to make businesses pay for sick leave before they'll step in to help. The Ford government has been under pressure for months to implement its own provincial sick day program. So what now? Monty McNaughton is Ontario's Minister of Labour. Hi, Minister. Good to see you again. Thank you for making the time.
Great to be on your show again.
Minister, what you're proposing to the federal government, it covers one loophole of the current program, the amount of money people can access, but it doesn't cover another big loophole, which is that it takes about 3 to 5 days for people to access that money. So you do have to go through a period of time without pay. Why not address that by legislating something like 2 paid sick days for at least the duration of the pandemic?
Well, the biggest gap in this system right now here in Ontario is that the federal program pays less than minimum wage. So we've come up with a sensible top-up that will ensure that workers get paid quickly. Ontario wants to double the federal program to $1,000 per week for 4 weeks, and Ontario would pay the entire cost of that. The reason why this is important is because the federal infrastructure is in place. Those checks are already going out. So it makes sense to really double that program and get money into the pockets of workers.
Again, though, I take your point and I acknowledge that the amount of money was an issue, and we certainly had heard that from a number of advocates and essential workers. But the other problem is that they can't take that absence from work if they're depending on the money they were planning to earn in that day or the next day or the following day. It will take them at least 3 to 5 days to get that check from the federal government. Again, advocates say if you legislated 2 days so that it could happen through a different means, you would address that loophole as well. Why not go down that road?
Well, we've been advocating to the federal government now for months, and to their credit, they have listened. We know in the beginning of the pandemic and last summer that checks were taking a long time to get to workers, but in the fall they improved it. Workers' payments are directly deposited in their bank accounts now between 3 and 5 days. Workers can now apply more than once to the federal program. And because of Ontario's advocacy, the federal program is now eligible for 4 weeks. So this is the final gap in the system to ensure that workers are paid $1,000 a week in Ontario, which is $25 an hour. And this will really go a long ways to getting workers and families through this third wave of the pandemic.
But you know that the federal government is resisting that very concept that you're putting forward. This is what a statement from the spokesperson for Minister Freeland's office said earlier today, in part. When Ontario is ready to mandate sick leave in provincially regulated businesses, as we have done for federally regulated businesses, we will be there to help. So are you unequivocally saying that Ontario is not willing to mandate those paid sick days?
Look, 2 hours later, Prime Minister Trudeau gave a very positive statement ensuring that he would have workers' backs. We're very optimistic about that. Again, this is a really sensible solution, and it's not just Ontario calling for this. I mean, the British Columbia Finance Minister, who's an NDP member, actually came out last week and said we need the federal government to be a partner. Again, look, I understand the Employment Standards Act, for example, is provincial jurisdiction, but we need to put politics aside and do what's best for the workers. And we want to simply pay the bill, but have the federal program be delivered to all workers in Ontario.
What is your government's resistance, though, to legislating even a few days just during the pandemic? Because you know, as well as I do, that has been something that people who are advocating for these essential workers have been calling for months and months and months.
Well, look, there's been a number of bills brought forward, the last one from the Ontario Liberals, where they squarely want to put this on the backs of small businesses. We're not going to do that. I mean, small businesses are challenged enough. We need them to have a fighting chance to prosper after COVID-19 is over. But we also need jobs for workers to go back to. So again, the federal program is the best avenue to get $1,000 per week out to workers. And I have to add, Vashi, the other upside of the federal program is that it's for all workers in Ontario. So if you belong to the gig economy, we have hundreds of thousands of workers in Ontario that are part of the gig economy, or if you're self-employed, the federal benefit applies to them. That's another reason why it just makes sense. It's reasonable to use the infrastructure that's in place, just simply double that federal program to $1,000 per week, and also make it retroactive for 60 days.
So with respect, I do want to challenge you on, and my interpretation of what you said just there is that it's because of the cost to businesses that you don't want to legislate those paid sick days. And I certainly understand the point that small business in particular has weathered an incredible storm throughout this pandemic. But this isn't just for small businesses. And in fact, even the Ontario Chamber of Commerce has come out saying it's okay to offer paid sick days as long as it's backstopped by one level of government. So in fact, you could have legislated it and come up with a program, could you not have, where the provincial government backstops what businesses, or small businesses in particular, maybe not the big ones, which have continued to profit throughout this pandemic, are required to pay. Why not go that route?
The simplest, fastest way to get checks into workers' pockets is through the federal program. The administration is already in place. They need to simply double it. I mean, they're paying workers in Ontario and right across the country below minimum wage. It is an injustice for workers. We need them to choose to stay home when they're sick. And when they're getting in Ontario $12.50 an hour, they're not going to stay home. That's why in the middle of this third wave, we need the federal government to join us, just work with us. They've offered help on a number of files. This is a big one. We just need to get the job done. They can flip the switch and get it over with quickly.
But the federal program has not seen the uptake that was projected. And I know that you're saying it's just because of the amount of money. But like I said, there are a couple of reasons for that. It's not just the money, right? I'll lay out for our viewers how bad the uptake has been. As of March 28th, the CRA says that just about less than a sixth of what was projected to be spent on the program was actually accessed. Your government has been familiar with that. The feds have been familiar with that. It's not just because of the amount of money. So the way in which you're positioning this and saying, if the government just flips this switch and people are able to access more money, all of a sudden they're going to use it. In lieu of your government legislating a few paid sick days, how can you be so sure that that's accurate? What if the uptake still isn't there and you had the opportunity to do something and you didn't?
Well, we know 300,000 workers in Ontario have actually either received that benefit or are receiving it now. So there has been uptake. But to get your point, there's about $700 million left in that bank account. Look, we're in the middle of a third wave. We just need to get through this. We need to work together. This is a very simple fix, and Ontario's willing to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to bolster this program. $1,000 a week, that's $25 an hour for 4 weeks, and make it retroactive for 60 days. This is important for the workers here in Ontario, and I know other provinces are of the same view.
Minister, I have to ask you on a broader scale, and I think we've heard from a lot of viewers about this. Doctors, mayors, you name it, they have all been saying for a number of months that there had to be action on this file. I know that your government has pointed to the federal government, but those advocates have pointed to your government too. You've known the deficiencies in the federal program. You got your answer in the budget. Why did it take so long for your government to acknowledge that it had to do something in this realm? And do you regret taking as long as you did to acknowledge that some form of increased paid sick leave or paid sick days is necessary to curb the awful trajectory of this virus, in particular in hot spots in the province?
Well, we worked with the federal government leading up to their budget, advocating for them to increase the dollar amount. We were clearly disappointed in the federal budget. I mean, $100 billion in new spending, but not a dime for workers in Ontario or right across the country. Last week is actually when we went to the federal government just after the budget to put this proposal in front of them. But again, I'm an optimist. I was very happy to see Prime Minister Trudeau's response today. And I know there's been discussions between Queen's Park and Ottawa today, and we just want to get the job done.
But again, in the meantime of this back and forth between your government and the federal government, and it's a question for the feds too, there are, people who have gone to work sick because they felt they had no other choice. There's a positivity rate in Brampton of 22%. Again, do you regret not doing something sooner?
We've been advocating for months on behalf of workers. Again, the federal program has the abilities to ensure that every worker in Ontario gets paid, those that are self-employed and those gig economy workers, plus all of the others. So this is a simple fix, $1,000 per week. That means that workers wouldn't have to choose between their job and their health.
Okay, Minister, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Vashi.
After resisting months of calls to offer paid sick leave to Ontarians, Premier Doug Ford has come up with a compromise. His government won't implement its own program, but it's offering to double the federal sickness benefit for Ontarians from $500 a week to $1,000 a week. What does the federal government think of that idea? Philomena Tassi is the federal Labour Minister. She's with us now from Hamilton. Hi, Minister. Good to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Thanks, Vashi. Great to be here.
I have a number of questions for you on another big issue for you, of course, and that's the legislation introduced around workers who were striking in the Port of Montreal. I just want to start because we spoke to Minister McNaughton, your provincial counterpart, a few moments ago on the show with the issue around paid sick days. Is it the federal government's position that any additional help will be predicated on the Ontario government legislating paid sick leave for workers and businesses?
Well, first, let me say that I think it's great that the Ontario government is stepping up in this regard. Any action to help further protect and support workers, particularly those that are sick and maybe having COVID symptoms, to stay home, really, really important. So I think that that is fantastic. I think that the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance has been clear this morning with her statement, where she is saying that when Ontario is ready to mandate sick leave, that we will be there. Listen, we've worked collaboratively with all the provinces and territories throughout these very challenging times, and we're going to continue to do that.
So does that mean legislation? You're expecting the Ontario government to introduce legislation before you provide any additional help?
So I don't know that it would be specifics as to how the commitment would be made, that it would be mandated. But I think it's important to recognize that federally, what we did during the pandemic is went beyond the federally regulated workers. We created a sick benefit that all workers across this country would be able to access. And, that started with a 2-week benefit, and then we extended it to 4 weeks because we heard that greater protection was needed. So we were there for Canadians across this country. But the federally regulated workplace, as Minister of Labour, am very aware. I'm responsible for overseeing about 6% of the working population across this country. So I think that when we look at, situations with provinces, it's fantastic to see provinces stepping up. We applaud that. And, we can continue to work collaboratively because we absolutely want to help to support the protections of workers, and of course right now the flattening of the curve, and protecting workers so that they don't have to go to work when they feel sick is going to be a big step forward in that regard.
Ontario, though, wasn't the only province asking for some additional help where this benefit is concerned, BC as well. And I don't know if many of our viewers realize that only 2 provinces actually mandate paid sick days, PEI, and Quebec. Does this mean that any additional help where sick leave is concerned from the federal government will be predicated on any province that's asking for it mandating their own paid sick leave?
I think it's really important that the provinces make the commitment that this is something that's important. It's going to be an ongoing commitment that they will make, and then we will work collaboratively with them.
When you say ongoing, do you mean beyond the pandemic?
Yes, a commitment to sick. That's right.
So you expect provinces to mandate some kind of paid sick leave permanently in order to get more help from the federal government where this is concerned. Is that accurate? Am I interpreting that accurately?
I would say it's not the expectation, it's the ask. The ask is to say, look, on a going forward basis, we want to ensure that workers are protected across this country, and if they feel sick, they don't have to go to work if they feel sick. So Ontario, we want them to go back to providing that, to say, okay, we are going to mandate protections for workers if you feel sick, that you can have access to this sick leave. We think that is a positive step forward, and we will work with the provinces and territories as we have throughout this pandemic to help support them in order to get to that point where workers are going to be supported who are sick and feeling that they have to go to work because they can't pay for groceries or pay the rent.
What do those provinces get in return when you say that you're willing to work with them? Because there are definitely holes in the federal program, right? It takes 3 to 5 days to get the money. It pays less than minimum wage. You have to have been unable to work for at least 50% of your scheduled work week in order to qualify. The uptake as of the end of March was 1/6 of what your government projected it would be. There are holes there. Will you fill those gaps if you get that mandated leave from provinces?
So Vashti, I think that you're raising a very good point here, and that is that the federal government had to roll out billions of dollars in support. This is one of the areas where we were rolling out support. And so we had to act quickly. In the interest of acting quickly, there are some obstacles that are in the way that, of course, we would rather not have there. And so this is why I think it's important that we continue to have a collaborative spirit of working together and determining what our efforts are going to be so that collectively, at the end of the day, we are offering protections to workers across this country.
With respect, though, and I pose this question to the provincial minister, it's not like those obstacles were just flagged to you. A number of advocates have been flagging them for months, and Premier specifically asked you to fix them in the budget, but you did not. Do you regret not moving to make those fixes? I take your point on what the province's responsibility are, but do you regret not making those fixes sooner, especially if they could have helped essential workers who felt they had no choice but to go to work sick?
I think that we are doing the best we possibly can with the supports that are in place that enable us to make those payments and roll those funds out. As I said, for us, we represent federally regulated workers are 6% of the workforce across this country. So with the pandemic, we now have stepped into, uncharted territories. We are now in a situation where we are offering supports that we are crossing jurisdictions and doing that, and we're doing it because we want to ensure the health and safety of Canadians is protected. And so it's not that there wasn't a desire to do that. It was we had to work with what we had in terms of getting all these supports, whether that was the sickness benefit, the caregiver benefit, the CEWS, the business account. So there were so many mechanisms and supports that we were offering. As you know, I know you're interviewing a lot of people and keeping viewers up to date. So that's the situation that we are in.
I get all that. I'm not taking away. You've offered a ton of support to people. I get that. But there were clear fixes to this program that your government chose not to make.
Well, I think that we continue to look at those, right? We continue to look and improve at what we are doing, and you've seen that we've done that with a number of the measures, the rent subsidy, the CEWS. We continue to hear from Canadians and do what we can with respect to the systems that are in place. Okay. We always, at the end of the day, are going to put Canadians' safety first and foremost, but we have to work with the support systems that we have.
Okay, I'm running out of time, so I do want to ask you about the back-to-work legislation that you've tabled for striking workers in the Port of Montreal. I know that in tabling it, you insisted that you're not taking sides, but can you understand the viewpoint that it appears like you're taking bargaining power away from workers by legislating them to return to work?
Well, let me say a couple of things. First, I would say that this is not our preferred option. This is the option that we have to take because the situation is dire. The impacts are vast and deep. But let me set a bit of context. These negotiations have been going on for 2.5 years. The parties have been at the negotiating table with federal government support through the mediation service. So federal mediators have been working with the parties for 2.5 years on coming to an agreement. I, in February, took another step of appointing 2 of our most senior mediators and providing them to the parties so that they could, do the hard work, do the collective bargaining, and come to an agreement. The unfortunate reality is there's been no gains made, that they were at an impasse. They can't come to an agreement. So the message that we've given them is clear. We want you to come to an agreement. We are bringing forward this legislation, which includes a 14-day mediation process, which can be extended by another 7 days, so 21 days in total, because we want the parties to come to an agreement at the table. And so we are providing that additional support, but we have been there from the very beginning on this file, and we have been in contact with both sides on a regular basis, impartial way, but sending a very clear message. We support the collective bargaining process, and we would We want you to reach the deal at the table.
The union says, though, it isn't impartial, that basically this legislation has killed the employer's incentive to reach a deal.
Well, what I would say in response to that, Vashti, is they're at the table now. I'm encouraging them to continue those negotiations. The mediators that we have in place, and I want to give a special shout out to the mediators. They are working so hard, and I think the parties would tell you that the mediators have been helpful. They appreciate the support. And with respect to moving forward and appointing a mediator arbitrator, the parties have input into that. This is finding a person that is impartial. They have a direct say in who occupies that position. If the parties come and both submit a name that both of them agree to, that's the person that's appointed. So moving forward, there's going to be impartiality, there's going to be fairness, but the situation is so dire, Vashti, and it's not just economic, which is significant. And in the midst of a pandemic, you know that causes even greater complications. But we're also talking about health and safety of Canadians. There's ships with medicines on them. There's ships with dialysis equipment. There's ships with fertilizer that farmers need in order to get their crops going. So there's so much at stake here. This is a move that I take with a heavy heart, but it is why I'm impressing upon the parties. Keep doing that hard work of negotiating. Come to an agreement at the table. The mediators are there. We know they appreciate the support of the mediators. Please reach an agreement at the table.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it there. I am out of time. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Vashti.
Hi, I'm Vashti Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.